I'm going to show you a video that's going to help you save money and especially time in setting up your very first bioactive enclosure. So stay tuned. I'm certainly not the bioactive dude. I know orchids, I don't know other plants, but I've spent a lot of time researching the last few weeks, and I've put together a couple of enclosures that I think that you're going to find really appealing. And I'm going to show you how to save some time and save some money. So let's get into it and let's take a look at those enclosures and how I set them up.
The tank that we'll be using today is a 12-inch by 12-inch by 18-inch Enclosure enclosure. You can use any size enclosure to make your bioactive terrarium, but this is the size that we're going with. I'm going to put the link to some products that we'll use in this build in the descriptions below. This is one product I would not have shipped in. Visit your local pet store or reptile show to pick up your terrarium. But you will find some nice deals on some of the products that we'll be using here, again, in the description below. Let's go ahead and talk about the supplies that we'll be using for this build. This is a pack of 4 cork tiles that I got off of Amazon, and I'll share links down below in the descriptions. This is a plastic bottle, a simple plastic bottle. I'll talk more about this later. You don't have to use the Fuji Apple brand. We'll be using a silicone that's safe for aquariums, very, very important. I'll throw that link in the description below. And we'll definitely need a tape measure and some kind of a cutting instrument like a straight edge knife. We'll be adding some wood to the enclosure. This is your preference. You can use driftwood, you can use cork bark, whatever type of wood that you want to add to the enclosure. A key component will be spagna moss. We'll talk about that more in detail later. And certainly plants, and you can select whatever type of plants that you want to select. Here I have a bromeliad, some vines, and a couple of other miscellaneous plants that we like. And again, this is a very, very basic setup. This will certainly change over time. For the substrate, we're using a blend of 50/50 worm castings and Zilla jungle mix. Links will be in the descriptions below. Let's go ahead and get started. Our very first step is to cut that background out. And again, our tank is 12 by 12 by 18 inches tall. Our cork flats are 12 by 12 inches by 12 inches. So we're going to cut an inch off of one of the sides. We do this to match the inside dimensions of the tank. Did I mention that we needed a pen here? This is going to be a very simple process. I marked the cork flat and I used my razor knife and cut that side out. This really doesn't have to be perfect. It can be a little bit rough because eventually the plants will hide this side. With that inch knocked off of the cork flat, I'm going to go ahead and grab the tank, and we're going to dry fit this cork flat into the tank just to make sure the measurements are okay. Pushing it down, and it looks like it fits as snug as a bug. Looks like everything's good to go. Let's go ahead and take that cork flat out, and now comes the fun part. We're going to take our silicone and we're going to put some beads down so that we can adhere that cork flat to the back of this tank. I've seen some videos where people will prep this glass with an alcohol solution to adhere the silicone better to the glass. I haven't done that here because I find that this silicone will stick to the glass very well. Here I'm smearing that silicone on the glass using a piece of paper that I found in the cork flats. It's a wax type of a piece of paper, and it's smearing the silicone just perfectly well. At this point you could use gloves or you can use a putty knife, anything that you want to use to smear that silicone and get an equal spread of silicone on the glass. Let's go ahead and put our background in now that we have everything measured, the silicone in, and now it's going to apply to the glass with that silicone, pressing it down firmly, making sure that we get a really nice seal on this background to the glass. You can really get creative with this next step. What we're going to do is go ahead and close those doors to the tank, set it upright, and we're going to take the cork flat that we had extra from cutting off the side, and we're going to break that apart and make contours on the background by adhering it with the silicone. Now you can take a full sheet of the cork flat and do this. I'm just going to do a little bit for this tank for demonstration purposes. And what I'm doing here is I'm breaking the ends off, the pieces on the ends, so that it doesn't look like squares. and it looks like more of a contoured effect. This will look really cool once it's attached to the back. You can do this with the cork flat, you can do it with the dried spagna moss, you can do it with any kind of objects that will make this tank look more authentic. A little cleanup effort, and we're going to pull out 3 pieces of cork bark that I've selected for the back of the tank. What we're going to do is take the silicone and we're going to apply some silicone to the sides of the cork bark. We're going to take the pieces of cork bark and then apply them to the background one at a time, all 3 pieces. Once we're done, then we're going to take the cork flat and cut, and we're going to take the cutout pieces and apply that to the background as well. Once that's all done, I'll put something down to hold everything in place, and we're going to let this sit overnight so that everything dries. I'm sure at this point you're asking why we need to do this, and you certainly don't. The cork flat alone will look really, really nice, but what we're going to do is put those cork bark pieces in there so that eventually we can take some moss and put it in the cork bark. These are concave pieces of cork bark. Put the moss into the cork bark and put some either air plants or some other type of plant in each one of those cork barks so that we can get more growth on the back of the tank. At this point, I'm putting the cork flat pieces that I broke up earlier on the back of the tank. And again, this is where you could just go completely crazy and put whatever other kind of decorations you want on that on the cork flats to make it look aesthetically pleasing. With the background complete, now we can focus on step number 2, and that's doing the substrate. I bet you were really wondering what we were going to do with that pop bottle in the very beginning. Well, here I'm cutting out the top part of the pop bottle, and once I get that cut out, I'll throw away the bottom part, and I'm going to cut some slits in the bottom part. We're going to use this pop bottle to allow us to drain the tank if we overwater at some point. I saw this trick on another video, and it looks really, really easy to use. So we're cutting the slits in the pop bottle. We'll bend those slits back. We'll put some silicone on the slits and adhere it to the bottom of the tank, and then we'll put our substrate on top of this pop bottle, and being able to take off the top, put a rubber hose into this pop bottle will allow us to drain off any excess water that accumulates on the bottom of the tank. I found this a little bit difficult to do it on my own, to hold the pop bottle, to bend the slits, and to put the silicone on those slits. So my wife is helping me with this step. The important part is that you get a good amount of silicone on each one of those slits so that then you can press the top of the pop bottle onto the glass and hold it there. And here comes the tricky part. We want this pop bottle attached to the glass for at least 24 hours, and it's hard to put it down and hold it on the glass. So what I'm doing here is taking a bag of sand, or in this case, the high-fired clay pellets, and putting it on top of the pop bottle, and that should hold it in place. It's really important to give this whole process about a day to cure and firmly adhere to that bottom. Here we're pulling that bag of clay particles and letting it just fall into the bottom of the tank. We're going to use that clay compound as the base to our draining system. You might have noticed at this point that this is a different tank. We actually did 2 tanks while we were filming this video, and we'll switch from this point back and forth between the 2 tanks. We're going to use a piece of plastic screening that you can find in any hardware store used for screen doors as the barrier between our drainage layer and our substrate. This is a great inexpensive option for your barrier layer. Make sure that you're cutting at least a 1/2 inch extra on all 4 sides. And of course, make sure that you account for that soda bottle and make a hole in your barrier so that that soda bottle cap can stick up through your barrier screening. As you can see, this measurement doesn't have to be exact, but it should be pretty close so that you don't get a lot of your substrate, your main substrate, falling down into your drainage material. Now with the square cut out and a hole for the bottle, we're going to go ahead and put that screening barrier down on top of our drainage material. You'll have that 1/2 inch extra on all 4 sides. Just put it down for now, and when we put the dirt in, We're going to cover up the drainage material, and that extra 1/2 inch will bend up so that it catches all of the substrate. Speaking of substrate, we've mixed in the worm castings with the Zilla jungle mix, and we're all set to add this to the enclosure. Again, this is about a 50-50 mix. It doesn't have to be exact. The worm castings will be a nice rich base, and the Zilla jungle mix will be the perfect material to hold in moisture. Here's a step that you could skip, but we absolutely believe in this step. Mix in crumbled, dry, decaying leaves, and this is going to be the food that your isopods and springtails, to make this whole enclosure bioactive, will be feeding on. Very, very, very important step. To continue with step 2, the substrate, we're going to go ahead and add in this mix of substrate into our enclosure. We're going to add probably about 2 inches of substrate in, and that will be a really nice base for any plants that we intend to add. As we fill in the rest of the substrate, let me talk about the next part of this step, and that's putting in a wall. I really, really love this. I found this in another video on creating a vivarium, a bioactive vivarium, and this will create 2 different layers of the substrate and utilize more of the ground surface area. We're going to take another piece of the cork flats, cut off the side as we did for the background. And again, this doesn't have to be perfect. All that we're trying to do here is fit it into the enclosure. Once we get that side piece cut off, then we dry fit it in to just make sure that it fits. If it doesn't fit, you can make small adjustments as you go. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect. Then once we do fit it in, we get a kind of a feel for how high we want our wall. And this is the point where you really don't want a clean cut. You want kind of a jagged edge so it looks more natural. So we're going to break off the top of the wall in a very jagged manner. Very unscientific, but this will look a lot better once it's in the enclosure. Again, this is a great step where you can just let those creative juices flow. Design that wall however you want. Maybe one side will be a little bit higher than the other, however you want to design it. With the wall in place now, we're going to go ahead and add some more substrate to the back behind the wall, and we're going to add some to the front of the wall as well, just to kind of fill in. This will give you some depth for your plants. But one thing you want to remember is don't cover up that drainage bottle. Make sure that the top is absolutely above the substrate. Let's go ahead and finish off step 1 and complete the substrate here. What can be more fun than decorating in an enclosure like this? From one of my favorite baseball sayings, go crazy folks, go crazy. There's so many different options. For this enclosure, we're going to focus on 2 different decorations. First, the wood, and second, the plants. For the wood, we're selecting a very thin wood type because of the animals that we'll keep in this tank. The first piece of wood was collected locally, and the next 2 pieces of wood are just curly pieces of branches. Again, this tank will not represent what it looks like today, perhaps 2 or 3 months down the road. This will change dramatically based on the animals that we keep in the tank and as the tank grows out. Let's check out the plants that we're going to put in this tank. I was fortunate enough to find a couple of sales at our local nursery and a local pet store, and all the plants that we'll put in this tank all cost less than $8. What a super bargain. We're taking off as much dirt as we possibly can from these plants, simply because we don't want excess fertilizers going into this enclosure. As far as the placement of these plants, and actually the plant names themselves, I'm a complete novice, and that's something that I'll have to research. This is all spur of the moment. Let's put it where we think that it looks good. I like a couple of display plants in here and smaller non-display plants up in front. But for me, not knowing these plants and not having a plant background, this is kind of an ad hoc kind of setting. I guess we'll see in a couple of months how they look. We're putting in some plants with some size, but we're also putting in this beautiful fern. I love this fern, the colors, the green colors that it has, I think will really stand out in this tank. Again, I'm really hoping that this whole tank, all the plants fill out nicely in the next few months. And now a plant that my wife really loved. She absolutely adored this red plant. I have no idea what it is. If anybody knows what these plants are, go ahead and leave a comment below in the description and let us know. Again, for now, we're just setting this tank up in a basic manner. We'll add more plants later on once these plants fill out, and we then can look at blank spaces in the tank and put in more plants. We're going to go ahead and add some spagna moss on top of the substrate in certain positions. This will help with the humidity in the tank, to hold the humidity. It's also going to provide a moist area for the isopods and the springtails that we add later to make this whole enclosure bioactive. 2 clumps of spagna moss, one on the lower and one on the top level, should do it. And the last part of this substrate step is watering everything down, really making sure that spagna moss is really wet and making sure that the substrate is moist for the plant. Just a quick note, we're using distilled water in this sprayer instead of tap water. Using tap water will stain your glass and make it really look unattractive. The distilled water will evaporate and not leave marks on your glass. And now the stuff that makes it bioactive, we're going to go ahead and add some isopods and some springtails. The isopods that we're adding are Armadillidium maculatum, the zebra isopods. While isopods and springtails won't completely take care of all the debris from your animals, they will take care of a lot of it. And here's the finished product. I'm really excited about how this turned out. We don't have the animals in, but if you have some suggestions on what we should put in this tank, go ahead and leave them in the comment below, and I'll see what I can do. Again, this is a very basic setup. You can do all kinds of creative things with this bioactive enclosure, and I'll leave that up to you. I really had a blast making this, and I'll certainly make more of these bioactive enclosures. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something from this. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that like below. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe and the notification all. Thanks for watching.